Assalamu alaikum. In the previous lecture, we have seen how the soil is formed from the rocks through the physical weathering. In today's lecture, we will continue with the weathering and we will study the chemical weathering. The chemical weathering is basically the breaking down of the rocks through chemical processes. And there are basically several elements that involve in this process. You need oxygen, water, carbon, and some acids, whether it's organic acids or whatever types of acids. The presence of these elements with the rocks and their interaction can actually break down the minerals and or change the minerals through different chemical reactions. And these through these chemical reactions, when it happens, actually the rocks will be broken down and converted into soil. I'll give you an example here. As you can see, this is basically a chart showing you what is exactly happening here. So when you have water from the rain, as the rainfall, it actually exposed to air, and actually it interacts with carbon dioxide that presents in the atmosphere. And this is actually will form an acid. Now, when this water, which has now an acid, goes into some of the minerals like the feldspar, it actually like react with it. And by these reactions, because now it's an acid, and by this reaction, it actually loosens the minerals. And through this loosening, some of the ions will be dissolved and then it will be released. And by doing so, the minerals will be transferred from one form to another, leading to the breaking down of these minerals or of this rock. So basically, the rocks will be broken down into smaller pieces and decomposed through actually the process of transformation of minerals through the chemical reactions from one form to another. There are basically 6 different chemical reactions that can lead to the breaking down of rocks chemically or biochemically, let's say. You have hydration, hydrolysis, oxidation reduction, dissolution, carbonation, and complexation. Now let's go through them one by one and give an example how these chemical reactions can lead to the formation of soil. Starting with the hydration. Well, the hydration in a simple way is illustrated in this figure, as you can see. Basically, the water molecules basically attach to the minerals. We know that the water molecules contain a positive side and negative side, a negative side from the oxygen and the positive side from the hydrogen. So if this mineral is basically a positive side, then the negative side of the water would actually attach to the minerals. And due to this attachment, the minerals will undergo hydration, and then it can be transformed to another form of minerals. Basically, what happens here, we know that when the rocks are exposed to air and to rainfall, they basically can absorb some of the wet water, and then it gets hydrated. And what happens with that, it actually expands. So the mineral expands. When it expands, it becomes heavier, and then it starts to disintegrate into smaller pieces. And in this example, you can see also the feldspar. When the feldspar absorbs water, it converts to clay or to kaolinite. So we see now how one form of mineral transforms to another form, leading to breaking down of the rock. The second process is hydrolysis. Now, the main difference between hydrolysis and hydration is that in hydration, the water does not dissociate. In hydrolysis, the water dissociates into H and OH. Then what happens that the hydrogen of the water replaces a cation in the minerals, leading to a formation of another type of minerals. So an example is what happens with the feldspar. The feldspar contains potassium. When water dissociates into H and OH, the hydrogen replaces the potassium in the feldspar, leading to form this type of minerals, and the potassium and the OH will be released in water. And through this process, we can see that the mineral transform from one form to another. Dissolution is another chemical process. And we know that water has the ability to dissolve many salts. So what happens that when you have salts or minerals, it actually the water dissolve it, causing it to dissociate. For example, if you look at the gypsum, when the gypsum dissolves in water, it dissociates into its cation and anion form. So it dissociates into calcium and sulfate. And by this dissolution, or when this dissociation happens, the minerals like broken down and leading to making it weaker. The dissolution also can change the structure of the rock. Some of these sedimentary rocks have pores on it, like what you can see in this example. When you have pores, it actually increases the surface area for interaction, by which water and air can get into these pores. Another very important concept here, that some of the salts have more ability to be more soluble than others. So for example, gypsum is a very soluble minerals. And what happens that when you have a rocks like this, like a rocks rich of gypsum, when it's actually exposed to rain, it dissolves, and by this dissolution, the rocks breaking down and some of the salts will become soluble, and then it can be washed out with the water. Carbonation is another form of the chemical reaction. The carbonation is very easy. You have water, and this water molecules interact with the carbon dioxide that even can be produced in the atmosphere or by the biological process, for example, through respiration and so on. So when water actually interact or react with the carbon dioxide, it forms carbonic acid. Now imagine that you have an acid and you put this acid on something. The acid actually helps to increase the dissolution of this mineral or salts. So for example, if you have gypsum or limestones or marble, when the carbonic acids react with it, it dissolves it very fast. So what happens here, I'll give you an example of the calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is called also limestone. So when the calcium carbonate interact with this one, with the bicarbonate, it forms actually the calcium bicarbonate, and the calcium bicarbonate is highly soluble and can be washed out. And this is what leads actually to breaking down the rocks. Oxidation and reduction is another famous chemical reactions that happens with the rocks. Simply what you have here, that the rocks will be broken down by the action of oxygen and water. Some of the rocks contains iron on it. And what happens that when the iron is exposed to air and water, it actually gets oxidized. When it oxidized, it becomes rusted. And when it becomes rusted, it becomes weaker and can be eroded or broken down easily. Also, through this process, actually what happens that the color of the rocks change, and the color can be red or yellow or brown, indicating the oxidation of the iron in this particular rock. Another example here is the oxidation of ferrous. So what happens here, that when this iron ferrous is oxidized into ferric ions, the size and the stabilization of the structure change and becomes weaker, and then can be broken down easily. Complexation is the last example of the chemical weathering, and complexation is a complex reaction. What happens here that the biological process produces organic acids. Organic acids like oxalic, citrics, or other examples interact with the rocks, with the minerals. Now, what happens through this interaction that the aluminum and the silicon on it can be dissolved and can be removed from the structure. And by removing the aluminum and the silicon from the structure of the minerals, it becomes weaker and then it can be broken down easily. An example is what happens to muscovite when through the complexation process, the aluminum is removed and causing actually the composition of this muscovite. So that's all about this lecture, and I'll meet you in the discussion session. Till that time, take care and bye.